Chapter 11. The second half. It had been ideal to have leave at the halfway point. Apart from the relief from the stress and strain of operations, it had given me time to take stock of things. I had really loved being with my Gladys and Valerie, now 10 months old and getting close to walking. Carnarvon was such a beautiful place to relax and where one could really wind down by taking walks in the lovely scenery of North Wales. One incident on leave did stick in my mind, which happened when we were on one of our country walks. Gladys was pushing Valerie in her pram and I was walking alongside in uniform as one always was during the war. All of a sudden a group of about a dozen German prisoners of war came marching past, escorted by a British Army sergeant. These poor chaps must have felt very sad and homesick at the sight of an Air Force officer walking with his wife and baby daughter, when they had probably left their families at home. Maybe even being bombed by us. The encounter was so unexpected that it shook me a bit. Really, what do we go to war for and inflict such tragedies on one another, I pondered. I had just to put such thoughts out of my mind as I prepared to go back to get on with bombing Germany again in a few days' time. Bombing is so impersonal, and to come face to face with these prisoners was something we in Bomber Command do not usually experience in combat as the soldiers at the front go through. By this stage of my tour I had got rid of any hatred towards Germans and just wanted to do the job in hand and survive in the process. Putting these thoughts behind me, I returned from leave and got down to readying myself for the second half of my tour of ops. The first thing I learnt on return was that the squadron was moving from Methil to R.A.F Chedborough, near the town of Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk, where we would be the only squadron on the base, which had been the home to number 214 Squadron earlier and then served as a heavy conversion unit. Before this move I did one more op from Methil to Dortmund to bomb a coking plant, part of the synthetic oil structure. The next day, the 5th of October, the squadron flew down to Chedborough and in very murky weather. We got in and settled ourselves down in the usual way, accommodation etc. Due to the fact that we had operated the previous day, we did not fly in until the afternoon, but we got in during daylight. My crew and I were one of the first to fly in and I was able to have tea in the mess around 4 PM just as it got gloomier and darker. I met a squadron leader who was the senior air traffic controller and we chatted over tea. He was suddenly called away because there was a problem with the runway lights whilst more aircraft were still due to arrive. That outcome of this was indeed tragic. For 1 hour later I learnt that the squadron leader was dead, having been electrocuted trying to fix the lights. He had seemed such a friendly person and had been so pleased to have an operational squadron on his base. Recently, we had got a new squadron commanding officer who had replaced the popular wing commander Fenwick Wilson. The new CO was a pre-war career officer who proved to be a thoroughly unpleasant and unpopular commander. He seemed to look down on all young officers who had been commissioned during the war. You can imagine, however, that the Dominion's Air Force crews soon let it be known what they thought. Still, we had to soldier on and do the job in hand. Socially, we ignored him as much as we could, and one thing that balanced things was that the station commander, Group Captain John Brotherhood, was a delightful and very popular officer. And a real gentleman to boot. The squadron was taken off for a week in order to settle in at the new base, during which time I celebrated my 23rd birthday in suitable style. The squadron recommenced operations on the 11th of October, attacking marshalling yards at Aberfeld in the rear. This time I had a second pilot, doing his first op, a very nice chap named John Allardyce. The next day proved very eventful when we attacked marshalling yards at Witton. After a successful bombing run in clear skies above cloud cover as we began our trip home, the stream were then attacked by a swarm of Me-109 and FW-109 German fighters. Our escort of fighters were nowhere to be seen, so we were very vulnerable indeed. Radio silence was broken to give warning of the attack, but, as a marker leading the raid, I was right up at the front of the bomber stream, which was attacked at the rear. There was, however, a streak of good fortune that came unexpectedly. A large force of escort fighters from the United States 8th Air Force, who had been escorting their own bombers that were now all clear, joined in the fray and attacked the German fighters, finally driving them off. If this timely intervention had not occurred, goodness knows how many of our bombers would have been shot down. The poorly armed Lancaster by day was no match for the Luftwaffe fighters, being designed primarily for night bombing. Conversely, the American B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberators were heavily armed and flew in close protective formations. On daylight, the Lancasters flew in a loose gaggle as they did at night, and thus were highly vulnerable to fighter attacks. On this occasion we were very grateful to the US Air Force fighter boys who had given us a very much appreciated example of Allied Air Force cooperation. Unfortunately, several Lancasters had been shot down before the Americans arrived. Around this time, the German army under Field Marshal von Rundstedt had launched a bold offensive through the forest of Ardennes on the Franco-German border. This attack had taken the Allies completely by surprise and led to a deep penetration of territory the Allies had previously captured. The attack had been well timed to take full advantage of winter weather in the area, which was covered in snow and shrouded in fog. The Allied air forces were grounded due to the fog and the whole scene became one of chaos and confusion. General Eisenhower, the Allied Supreme Commander, had called for urgent help from Bomber Command. Air Marshal Harris responded by ordering a massive attack on 3 towns close behind the German lines from where the huge support for the attack was based, as soon as the fog cleared. Our target was to be pronounced trees near the Luxembourg border. We were briefed every day for 7 days, but still fog prevented the raid taking place and we just waited and waited. Finally, on the 7th day we went on our raid. It had been very frustrating to know that our troops desperately needed air support, but it had been impossible to launch a support operation from fog-bound airfields into fog-bound areas. At last we were able to carry out the planned attack and we went to Trier 2 days running. Over the target on each day were huge concentrations of bombers, and coordinated with our attacks were attacks by other Allied air forces, based both on the continent and from UK. Finally, the German offensive was blunted and then turned back and the Allied offensive towards Germany was resumed. It was now the 23rd of December and we faced a rather uncertain Christmas. The weather in our area had turned into one of severe frost and everywhere was white. Before flying each day the ice had to be cleared from our aircraft surfaces and the ground crew had a tough time coping with the awful conditions. It came to Christmas Eve and we were on a night raid battle order. Our feelings were decidedly uneasy at the prospect of operating on Christmas Eve and possibly getting the chop. The thought uppermost in our minds was the possibility of being posted missing and the news being sent to our next of kin by telegram on Christmas morning. There was an unofficial and informal truce that there would be no bombing on Christmas Day itself. In keeping with this, we were scheduled to be on target around 6:30 p.m. and return before midnight. The target was Bonn Airfield, a vital link in air support for the German forces defending the front line in France. It was in an apprehensive mood that we took off in the darkening December afternoon, but in clear skies. By the time we crossed the French coast it was dark, but with a full moon rising. It is a Christmas Eve I shall never forget because of its awesome beauty. Firstly, as we crossed the snow-white countryside over England and France, and secondly, as the moon rose lightening the sky and ground below. As we approached the Allied and German front lines, flashes of gunfire and fires from burning targets gave the whole scene a lot of strange but awesome beauty. It was a sight to behold and remember, so stark and captivating it was. The night turned out to be dramatic for us in other ways and nearly produced our worst fears. We arrived near the target to find that we were early and the Pathfinder's markers had not yet been dropped. I decided to do an orbit because of the importance of hitting the target accurately, although my crew were not very happy about this, but accepted my decision. After all, it was a bright night and if other aircraft came close, we should have seen them. It was, however, a very anxious 10 minutes as I flew the aircraft around a wide orbit, to lose the time from being too early. Finally the Pathfinder markers went down and marked Bonn Airfield below. Our flak was pretty heavy, but not unexpected, as the target was so vital for the enemy to defend. The bomb aimer took over as we ran up to the target and he was able to actually sight the target under the vivid red and green markers. The sky was further lit up by explosions in the bomber stream caused by either bombers receiving direct hits from flak, or from the German device called scarecrows. These were fired up into bomber streams and exploded, giving the impression of a bomber of blowing up. The idea was to scare our crews into thinking the target area was extra heavily defended and that more aircraft were being shot down than actually were. It had worked well at first, when the Germans started the ruse, but it boomeranged once discovered. Because crews could comfort themselves by calling most explosions scarecrows and not other bombers exploding. We dropped our bombs, sighed Barrett. The bomb aimer was sure we had made an accurate strike on the target. The subsequent bombing photo was to prove him correct, but it was a photo we nearly didn't get back to development view. Just as we left the target and had closed the bomb doors, the mid-upper gunners shouted "Fighter! Fighter! Corkscrew port!" I responded to the call at once by initiating the much-rehearsed maneuver taught in practice so as to escape from an enemy fighter attack. I flung the aircraft into a 60-degree bank to port and then into a steep dive, as the gunners reported the fighter firing but missing and flashing past us. It was a German Me-262 twin-engine jet, one of a group recently employed for the first time by the Luftwaffe. A few nights earlier they had successfully attacked the Canadian No. 4 group on a raid. Fortunately, we got clear and made our way home, but with considerable relief. As we descended towards Chedborough there was a laugh. In extremely cold conditions it often happens that the microphone and one's oxygen mask gets blocked by moisture. I tried blowing in my mask several times without success, then I swore profusely with one very strong exclusive commencing with F. Just as I did this the microphone cleared. I did not think anything of this until later, after we had landed and we were at debriefing. The group captain asked me if it was me that had called out F on trying to call base. Apparently, the station senior officers had all been in the air traffic control waiting for the first aircraft to call and be heard by the R.A.A.F radio operators. When a very clear F came over the air as the first word received, I detected a slight smile on the group captain's face when he inquired and I responded with an innocent "What, me sir?" The debriefing turned out to be quite a fun affair because the debriefing personnel had increased the rum ration considerably. In celebration of our return for Christmas, we took a couple of tots out for our R.A.A.F driver Jean, who had as usual waited anxiously for our return. She was a schoolteacher in civilian life and a really lovely girl in looks and personality. So, in the event, we were able to enjoy Christmas Day without having to operate, since the whole group was stood down. It turned out to be a real white Christmas with a severe frost and a very happy atmosphere on the station, for all of our aircraft had returned safely from the last raid. Wherever I now celebrate Christmas, my thoughts always turn to 1944 and the very vivid and momentous Christmas Eve I experienced that year. Following this very special Christmas we were held up for a few days by bad weather. A mixture of fog, snow and frost prevented us from going anywhere. My crew were in a hut on their own and had made themselves very comfortable and warm. Their hut was in a wood and they had a good supply of fuel from the trees. They were considerably more comfortable than I was, because my room was in a very cold hut indeed, so cold that I used to put more on to go to bed than I took off. Even the water in my service wash basin used to freeze at night. The flight engineer Don McDonald came to see me and was horrified at the state I was having to live in. Later on he came back with Alex DL, the gunner, and told me they didn't want to lose the skipper through pneumonia. So the crew had decided that I should move into the hut where there were spare beds. Service-wise, this was very much a no-no, but I put that aside and thanks to them enjoyed the rest of the cold spell in comparative comfort. In their inimitable way they had also provided themselves with food, assisted by one or two R.A.A.F girlfriends working in the cookhouse. This sort of initiative was typical of them. We had now done 22 ops and had 8 to go. Number 23 was to the Gremberg marshalling yards in Cologne and then a similar target at Varenkel. Over some of the recent daylight raids, a rather strange pattern had emerged. I cannot remember now exactly which of these raids these particular incidents occurred. What happened was that on 2 days we went to the same target. There was no flak on running up to the target and we ran in over a blanket of cloud well below. The sky was brilliantly clear and just as the force opened their bomb doors on the first of the raids 2 aircraft from another base just blew to pieces. The next day the same thing occurred, this time to 4 aircraft. We never could find out what had happened and we all started to think about the much publicized secret weapons Hitler had always talked about. It was all rather unnerving, especially as there seemed no clear explanation. Some time later, I did hear a rumor that sabotage was suspected. A number of Italian prisoners of war were working on farms near the base concerned, and that it is possible that they may have been able to fix some sort of detonator to the bombing gear when the aircraft were on their dispersal. It certainly got us all twitched up until it stopped. One amusing incident occurred over transport to our aircraft on dispersal. The flight office corporal said to me to take the flight van, but was staggered when I told him I couldn't drive the car. "But sir," he said, "you are flying Lancaster, surely you can drive a van." In fact, I had never driven a car because when war came I was too young to drive. In the UK in war with petrol rationing there was no chance to learn in civil life, so it was not unusual for chaps of my age never to have learned to drive. The corporal put that right in the next few days. During these later daylight raids we had been told to keep a lookout for Hitler's V2 rocket trials, when skies were clear, and to estimate where we thought they had been launched in North Germany, Denmark or Norway, since before D-Day, Hitler had launched his long-threatened secret weapon attack with firstly, the remote-controlled Doodlebug rocket-driven aircraft. This was a devastating weapon, and on several visits to London I had experienced attacks by the V1. Firstly you heard the roar of the rocket motor and then there was complete and sudden silence as its motor cut out. You then anxiously awaited the explosion as the aircraft hit the ground and its explosive went off, hoping that it was not too close. Several hundred of these weapons were rained on London and many people were killed and injured and considerable damage was done to property. The defense set against the V1 was a huge contingent of anti-aircraft guns setting up a barrage through the area the Doodlebugs would fly. Further to this, the R.A.A.F employed its jet fighters against the weapon for the first time. The fast-flying jets could catch up the V2 and either shoot them down, or, audaciously, close in on the Doodlebug and tip its wing over with their wing. This action destabilized the V1 gyros and it spun into the ground. This being done over open country reduced the risk of damage to build-up areas. The V2 was a more sinister weapon as it gave no warning and just came out of its trajectory with no noise, hit the ground and exploded. It also carried a larger warhead and did much more damage than the V1. The V1 and V2 offensive was stopped by heavy bombing of sites by the R.A.F until, finally, the sites were overrun by the Allied armies as they moved into enemy territory. We had gone to Vawinkle by day on New Year's Eve and we then went there again on the 2nd of January, but at night. This was to prove rather eventful as the weather was bad. We took off in foggy conditions, went into cloud and stayed in it almost a whole way to the target. As we got towards it we came out of the tops of the cloud into a clear sky. We began our run up and then the mid-upper gunner called that a Halifax aircraft was above us with his bomb doors open. This was a real scare for there was nothing we could do but hope that he didn't release his bomb load on us. I looked up and saw the Halifax slowly fly right over us and it seemed a lifetime before he got clear. We then carried on and completed our bombing run and dropped them on the Pathfinder sky markers. On return to the English coast we received the message to divert at us 4th in Yorkshire, not far from Topcliffe, where I had served as a young airman before being trained as a pilot. The problem with these diversions was that they added to the normal strain of the operation. Often we could first make an attempt to land at base and then divert. Usually, a force of up to 100+ aircraft would be sent to one airfield and it became rather a free-for-all to get into land. First priority was given to the aircraft with problems such as engines out or other damage. If they were badly damaged they would, of course, go to the FIDO bases mentioned earlier, but, if only slightly damaged or with only one engine out, they would go with the rest of the force. We got to Dusforth and it took us about an hour before we got our turn to land. It was a very worn-out crew that eventually got to a hut to sleep as best we could. We had really began to feel the strain of our long tour of ops now and all the hazards and escapes had taken their toll. My nerves were very frayed and I could feel it. I slept fitfully and heard 2 of my crew members calling out in their sleep. The bomb aimer called out several times, bomb doors open, and the gunners shouted out about flak and fighters. They were showing clear signs of stress and were very quiet when we flew back to Chetburge that morning, after only a few hours restless sleep. During the debriefing at base, the medical officer, who usually attended these rituals, spoke to me and must have noticed how we were. He arranged for us to have our next week's leave brought forward a week. Gladys also noticed how stressed out I was when I got home, because I scared her by shouting out in my sleep. She didn't say much but did everything to help me enjoy a relaxing leave. When I got back to Chedbra, I noticed a great difference in my crew, and they must have seen the same in me. The week's leave had been a godsend. It was almost like the early part of our tour and we all felt ready to get stuck into our last 5 ops. One of the stresses of ops was the many times one was briefed and rebriefed, as targets and times were changed. For our 30 ops we were actually briefed 70 times, due to all these changes, most of which were caused by bad weather, but often were due to changes ordered from HQ Bomber Command. Our first op after leave was to Saarbrücken Marshalling Yards, the 3rd time we had been there. On this raid we were diverted on the return to base as there were only 2 airfields open throughout UK and extensive fog shrouding most parts of Britain. We were directed to St. Eval in Cornwall, right next to Newquay where I had started my training. Because of the fact that only 2 airfields were open, all 165 of No. 3 Group's aircraft were diverted there. The result was a really chaotic melee of Lancasters all vying for position to land. As usual, priority was given to disabled aircraft and those short of fuel. Eventually, after at least a dozen approaches, we got down on the ground. Fortunately, it was still light, otherwise there would have been a considerable risk of mid-air collision. Fortunately, the base did manage to find somewhere for us all to kit down. The next day was quite different, beautifully sunny and clear, so I decided to return low level along the whole of the south coast of England and then fly across to the west of London. I had another crew on board whose aircraft had been damaged. The captain was Mike Clemner, an Aussie, and he enjoyed seeing so much of the beautiful English coastline. We were really counting each remaining operation now, 26, 27, 28, 3 to go, etc. Then we arrived at number 30 and we wondered where it would be. It turned out to be a nerve-wracking affair. Due to bad weather we were to be briefed twice for night ops to the RA which were cancelled due to the bad weather. This did bring us a bit of luck though, apart from the strain of on again, off again, for a couple of days. The last op in the event became a daylight to Mönchengladbach near the RA to once again attack marshalling yards. It was a reasonable but cold day and Johnny O'Brien, the flight commander, came to see us off as he was not operating. Someone produced a camera and we had an air and ground crew photo taken. It was all rather an anticlimax as it went off quite uneventfully, and it was a happy crew that landed back at Chedbra, all rather elated at surviving our 30 ops. All the other crews congratulated us, as did the group captain. I quipped that we were munchin' glad to be back. Well, it was all over at last and we had carried out a good tour, with success as a crew. That was the last time we flew together, and although it has only taken 5 months, it had seemed a lifetime until it was all over. We were to go straight off on leave and then return to await our next posting. The crew had arranged for a lunch party in London before we all went our separate ways on leave. We went to our favourite London pub first and were greeted and congratulated by the pub regulars. It was a wonderful feeling to receive their kind words. A crew lunch had been arranged at a nearby restaurant. The London crew members' relatives also came to lunch, at which I was presented with a lovely doll for my daughter and a special gift from my crew. It was a model of our Lancaster in squadron markings which I still have in my study, proudly displayed, a marvelous and historic memento of those great days 47 years ago. We said our farewells and off I went to Carnarvon to join a very happy and much relieved wife. The memory of that tour of ops and the pride it gave me is very fresh still today in 1993. We had been lucky as a crew, and at the time we operated there had been many casualties, but not the horrendous losses Bomber Command had suffered earlier. Nowadays, one has mixed feelings of sadness and pride. Pride at completing one's own tour, but sadness for all those 55,000 aircrew lost in Bomber Command. We have our Bomber Command Association reunions and one is conscious of the strong bond between us, as we share the pride and the sad memories of lost comrades from those momentous days.